There's something about sea turtles that I cannot stop thinking about. And not because they're unusual, but because they seem to live with a kind of mystery I've never fully understood. When they hatch, they don't immediately run toward the sea, they wait. And not for long, just long enough for enough of them to gather. And then they begin moving together. Some make it, many don't. The strange thing is, no one really knows why. Scientists can point to different factors. A turtle that hatches closer to the water might have a better chance. The weather might help. The predators might be fewer. But none of those things seem to guarantee anything. A turtle only a few steps from the sea can still be taken. Another, much farther away, somehow survives. Outcomes remain strangely unpredictable, and somehow the mystery keeps drawing me back. Because from the very beginning, the turtle only seems to control a very small part of its journey. It moves. The rest belongs to something much larger. That observation stayed with me because over the last few episodes I've been noticing different rhythms. First, the rhythm of reality. Then the rhythm of service, responsibility, and freedom. And then the rhythm of control, action, and holding. At first they felt like separate discoveries, but the more I sat with them, the more they began to feel like smaller circles inside larger ones. Reality contains service, service contains control, and the more carefully I look, the smaller my own sphere becomes. Which leaves me with the question I can't seem to let go of. If control only covers such a small part of reality, what carries everything else? I kept returning to that question, and not because I had an answer, but because I noticed how uncomfortable it made me. It exposed something I hadn't been paying attention to, how deeply I want certainty. And not simply information, certainty. I want to know that if I make the right decision, things will work out. That if I become skillful enough, life will become predictable. That if I understand enough, I'll finally stop being surprised. Perhaps that's why knowledge has always been so attractive, and not simply because it helps me understand reality, but because it quietly promises relief from uncertainty. Power seems to offer something similar. Strength, money, influence, experience, recognition, even wisdom. None of these are wrong, they're all valuable actually. But I wonder if we sometimes ask them to do something they were never meant to do. Not simply to help us participate in reality, but to protect us from it. That thought reminded me of something I've experienced while practicing movement. Sometimes a coach would ask me to attempt a movement that felt almost impossible, to lean backwards, to let my weight fall, to commit before every instinct in my body agreed. When the instruction came from someone I deeply trusted, I usually tried, and not because the movement felt less frightening, it didn't, but because I trusted the person asking me to make it. If the very same instruction came from someone with very little experience, my body reacted differently. I hesitated, I questioned it, and sometimes I ignored it completely. The movement hadn't changed, only my trust had. That made me wonder whether submission has less to do with difficulty and more to do with trust. Perhaps what we resist isn't letting go, perhaps we resist not knowing whether what we're letting go to is trustworthy. Another image kept returning to me, a sailor at sea. I've always imagined the sailor's challenge was reaching the destination, but I don't think that's quite right. The sailor doesn't spend every moment choosing between the destination and the wind. The sailor spends every moment reconciling two different movements, remaining faithful to the direction while continually adapting to the wind. Too much attachment to the direction and the sailor fights reality, and too much adaptation and the sailor simply drifts wherever the sea happens to take him. Wisdom seems to require both, direction and adaptation. But then another realization quietly appeared. Perhaps what I often call my direction is actually a destination. I imagine a particular career, a particular home, a particular relationship, and a particular version of the future. And without noticing it, I begin treating that image as though it were the direction itself. But perhaps direction is something much deeper than that. Perhaps direction is closer to a value. Someone may believe their direction is to build a successful business, but maybe the business is only one possible destination. The direction might actually be service. If the business succeeds, service remains. If it fails, service remains. The destination changes, the direction doesn't have to. Perhaps that's why adapting doesn't mean abandoning direction, it simply means allowing the direction to find another expression. And then I found myself thinking about the turtles again. After reaching the sea, their journey isn't over, it's only beginning. They spend nearly 2 decades crossing an ocean, living with currents they don't control, storms they don't choose, predators they cannot predict, and then something remarkable happens. Many of them return to the very beach where they first entered the sea, not simply to come home, but to lay their own eggs, to begin the journey again for another generation, to serve something beyond themselves. When I first learned that, I couldn't help but thinking about my own life. Years ago, I left home searching for freedom. At the time, I thought freedom was the direction. Looking back now, I'm no longer sure it was. Freedom was one expression of something deeper. Over the years, the destination kept changing. Different countries, different work, different communities, different dreams. But beneath all of those changes, one movement quietly remained. A movement towards service. And as that direction slowly became clearer, something unexpected happened. Freedom found its place. Responsibility found its place. Neither disappeared. They simply stopped competing. They became different expressions of the same direction. Watching the turtles return to the place where their own journey began, not because they controlled the ocean, but because they remained faithful to something that carried them across it, made me wonder if that's what direction really is. Not the image I hold in my mind, but the value that remains, even when every destination changes. And that leaves me with 2 questions I can't seem to escape. How does the sailor know the direction? And if the sailor doesn't carry the wind, who does? Because if I'm not responsible for outcomes as we discovered before, then someone or something must be. And perhaps whether I can surrender that responsibility depends entirely on whether I find that one worthy of my trust. I'm beginning to wonder if faith begins here, not with certainty, but with trust. And not with controlling the wind, but with learning to sail. Not by abandoning direction, but by remaining faithful to it, while allowing reality to shape the journey. Because perhaps the deepest question isn't whether I can surrender, perhaps it's whether I've come to trust the one to whom I'm surrendering.